your thank you. Thanks so much, Karen. We ask that you mute yourself unless you are speaking up. Each presentation is going to have an area called questions. We are trying to keep our discussion points, the presentations, to no more than 7 minutes. You'll hear me give a 6-minute warning so that we can always provide for some time for people to ask questions. You can use the chat if you've got questions coming to you in advance before the question period and you don't want to lose track of it. We welcome really respectful conversation and discussion today, and just ask that you wait your turn and let somebody finish speaking before you start speaking. If we have lots of folks that are wanting to participate, you can either use your hand feature, which you'll see under reactions in Zoom, or you can just indicate in the chat that you'd like to speak up. I've already gone over the topics that we're going to cover today: environment and green spaces, mobility, enhanced health, safety, youth, and then mapping, intersecting it all together. What I didn't tell you was on the 8th, we heard from the following working groups. And so you can also go and view that video once we post it up on the OVCA website. We heard from seniors, so enhanced spaces, supports, and services for seniors in OV. We heard from the working group that was supporting children and their families. Same concept. What are the spaces, supports, and services for children in OV? We heard from cultural retention and growth, as well as economic viability and growth. Davin and I were working on that particular group. And I feel I've forgotten one. Team, who did I forget? With apologies.
You say
it'll come to me.
Services and supports?
It'll come to me.
Affordable housing. Did you do affordable housing?
Thank you. I didn't talk about affordable housing. Thank you, Bill, as part of the affordable housing working group. And that's actually the working group that's been meeting the longest. They started back in June, whereas the other working groups started as of the OV Future Cert launch in September 27th. So what's our objective today? We want to be reaching out to you to provide you with an update, and then also to engage you. So you're going to be seeing some polls and some questions. We are looking for your participation and feedback. For this to be a true OV community plan coming out of OV Future Search, we really need to hear from the community. So with that in mind, if you know of somebody that doesn't have a computer, so they aren't able to access Zoom, we would like for you to let us know that we'd like to find a way to connect with them so that we can ensure that we are sharing the information with them. If you know of somebody that couldn't make it today and they do have a computer, please let them know that we'll be posting the video from the December 8th session and the December 12th session on the OVCA website, which I think was in the chat earlier. If not, it'll be coming into the chat. So let's get started. Peter, could you start us off? Peter Clutterbuck, Program Manager Extraordinaire, working with me on OV Future Search. You could start us off, Peter, to be talking about, so what is OV Future Search?
Well, great. I'm happy to do that. Sue, this is sponsored by the Oakwood Vaughan Community Organization, nonprofit charitable group formed about 3 years ago out of local leadership, resident-led leadership, who have also initiated and are driving this particular future search. We're really interested in knowing what people want in Oakwood Vaughan to be like over the next 10 years, how it should develop, what should our future be. And we talk about futures because, as Sue pointed out in the agenda, and you'll see in the next slide, we're dealing with about 9 areas of importance to the quality of life in this community, from how you move around it, to how you're assured of health and safety, to how if you're a senior, you get supports, or a young person, you have activity to do. We're dealing about 9 areas. So there could be obviously different futures for each of these different 9 areas. And our challenge is to let the people most most concerned or involved in those areas, the stakeholders, residents, workers, to actually define what they think the future for their particular concern should be. And then our challenge would be to integrate that into a kind of a holistic, coherent plan that we can own as the community and advance to the city around the resources we need to make it happen. So the next slide actually gives you a bit of an idea of where we've been over the last year. We had some excellent research done by the Ryerson School of Urban Planning and Development and the Waterloo University School of Architecture. And actually, they produced some excellent reports for us to use, mostly out of statistical data and a lot of interviews that they did. And we still have 3 students from the Ryerson project that actually still engaged with us as volunteers since the winter term. Zach Bouchard, Devin Metherall, and Morgan Baker. They might be on the line now or coming on, and they've been very helpful to us in moving things along since September 27th. But a planning group formed in April after these reports came forward. And this planning group has dedicated itself to meet weekly since April. First of all, to plan an event on September 27th, where we called a kickoff event. And since we can't hold things indoors and this wouldn't be suitable for just doing online, we held it outdoors in the back of the Vaughan Road Academy. Had about 50 or 60 people come and talk to people, volunteer groups that were working in at least 7 of these different areas that we had organized for that time. So we got initial input from people at that level, commenting and observing some of the stats that we had collected, giving some of their thoughts, and volunteering themselves to continue to work in the working groups that followed up. Now, this has all been volunteer driven, except for a small grant we have from the Maytree Foundation that we just received in October that allows us to get part-time help from Karen James to help us coordinate. As you want to make these 9 areas futures come together, we got to do a bit of coordination across all this activity and all these volunteers. And Kieran's helping us do that, including helping us manage these last 2 sessions. So then, Sue.
Yep. Okay, so I'm just pressing time a little bit down here. We had a spot we were going to say, hey, what is OV Future Search? I've given you the answers. It's everything that you see on this slide here, A through D. So it's a project, create a plan for the future. You heard Peter talk about that. We are dreaming about what OV will be like. And frankly, it's been a really great way to learn more about Oakwood and Vaughan and to interact with our neighbors. Anybody seen this mural on the far right side of the screen? Just use your chat and you can indicate, where have you noticed that mural before in Oakwood and Vaughan? It's a mural about togetherness. I think it's a really neat one. Please go ahead and use your chat function and indicate where you have seen this mural.
Melissa says that it looks familiar, but she's not sure. I'm not sure where it is.
That's okay. Thanks, Melissa. Any other guesses?
Rebecca says the Montessori school building.
Oh, that would be really neat. Same street as the Montessori, but not on the Montessori building. Any others? There we go. You can find that mural on the west side of Oakwood, just north of Rogers Road, on the building just south of the Jehovah's Witness building. I think it used to say a tax building on it. Okay, Peter, why are we creating an OV community plan?
The next slide shows you the areas that we're covering. And we've talked about those before. There have been working groups working on each of these areas and collecting information in a variety of ways, from surveys. I'm sure all of you have been invited to answer a survey in the area of your particular interest. To build on the stats work that we did, we have backgrounders and 2-page backgrounders on each of these areas for people to get a basic appreciation of the composition of people who live in our community, for example, and some of the issues like the state of affordable housing. And we also have done some really interesting work walking the streets and talking to people. Sue and Davin led a few people around the Oakwood Vaughan community, going into stores, talking to business owners, talking to people on the street who would spend a few minutes with us answering questions about the nature of the neighborhood. So those face-to-face interviews, which you don't have often nowadays, were really masked face-to-face interviews, are very important to do to get reach out and try to involve many people as possible. But when we talk about the neighborhood of Oakwood Vaughan, it might be important to, again, go back to that map and get an appreciation for why we've defined the area that. You'll see a kind of blocks outlined in red lines on the map. And the advantage of that kind of way of looking at our community is we can actually collect Stats Canada data by those blocks. So we can get very local level data on things like where seniors live in our community, where youth live, where lower income communities are. So we know a good deal about our population from that particular map. And but we also know that that gives us a population of about 12,600 or so people in that particular area. And it is something that we decided is something that would be manageable for us. But we know that many of you may live just nearby and might think that our boundaries are a little bit constricted. You might have some other ideas about what other streets might be included in our boundaries. And we're interested in being open to that and hearing from you where you might actually, what you might actually think about those boundaries. So I think we're going to put a poll up, which gives you an opportunity to indicate what you think about those boundaries and what what you might want to add or consider. Is that up now, Karen?
The poll should be in the chat. Everybody could go to the chat and select the link in the chat. It's an important poll because as we go forward with the OV community plan, we want to be really transparent with the balance of data, as Peter was talking about, as well as the balance of the neighborhood and what people feel about representation of the neighborhood.
If we were to do a general kind of idea of what we've actually included here, if you're at the 5-point area where Oakwood and Vaughan meet, and you think about walking 1 kilometer north, west, east, or south, you kind of get a general impression of this neighborhood that's included in the red boundaries there. It's about 1 kilometer down from Oakwood and Vaughan to St. Clair, for example, and we're 3/4 the way there in this map.
So I'm going to stop sharing and just take us over to the poll to see how the results are going.
Now we currently have 6 people who have responded.
Fantastic. So everyone else, if you could please go to the poll. Yep, I can see 7 now. So again, click on the link that's in the chat to take you out to the poll. It's in a website called Slido. I'd like to share the results of that poll. The question on the poll is, are you okay with the map that we had shown there? Or if not, what streets do you want included in the OV community plan document? Okay, we're up to 8 people. A few more folks would be very helpful.
We actually have a couple people who have left comments in the Q&A, which I can read out while people are answering.
Okay. I'm going to share the screen then as well. So one moment. Thank you, those that have answered, whether in the Q&A or here. We've got 44%. So out of 9 who have responded, we're saying okay as is. That's where the majority is. And we've got a tie, 22% extend it further south, and then also 22% said other. Karen, if you could give us a couple of the other comments.
Yeah. So the first person said to extend further south, a bit further north, make it more of a rectangle shape. And then 2 people were expressing the need to make it a bit more flexible. So people who identify as belonging as part of the community.
Perfect. Thanks so very much, everybody, for your input. We're going to be taking that into consideration as we start writing the OV community plan. And let's actually start hearing from some of the working groups. We're going to start right away with environment and green spaces. So let me pull that up. And Liba, you are good to go.
I'm good to go. So I'm presenting on behalf of me and Morgan Baker. We were the co-leads. And people at September 27th, they signed up to say that they were interested in participating in the Green Table. And interestingly enough, one of the first things they did was they put trees up and down all of the streets. And then they said, we need more green space. And that was mostly what people were saying. When the group finally had an opportunity to meet online, and I have to say that we only met once online, what we decided to do was create a survey. And there is a black mark over my my other words. There we go. And we asked the members to submit survey questions. Next slide, please. So interestingly, Green Neighbors Network knew somebody who had already done a very comprehensive survey around the harbor, and so in the annex. And I took a lot of those questions and I included them in our survey. So that was really helpful to me. Next slide, please. We sent it to the OVCO mailing list, the OVNAP, you heard about OVNAP, their mailing list. I posted it, I included it in the OVCO newsletter. And then the thing is that people self-select. So what you have to understand about the survey is that it's not scientific. Next slide, please. At the same time, I wanted to make sure that the people around the table had the opportunity to look at the information in the in X University's research, and I circulated that. And I just thought I'd mention before I go into the survey. Next slide, please. That we were able to read how they identified and analyzed the best practices. So as you can see, Green Justice, the City of Toronto programs, mitigating the impacts and implementation of low impact developments. Next slide, please. So specifically, looking at the City of Toronto programs, one of our members, Bruce, who's on the call today, next slide, please, sent us these 3 slides. So homes and buildings, lots of information about how the city is trying to help people to mitigate and prevent in terms of climate change. Next slide, please. As well as looking at transportation, like bicycling, and transportation, public transportation. So it's interesting to know what the city has already attempted to do. Next slide, please. And waste, clearly, is a huge issue. And I think that a lot of people are on board with the idea that if we consume less, that hopefully there would be less waste. In any case, that's a topic for another day. Next slide, please. So this is more or less what we asked. There were a lot more questions, and we got some identifiers, but we did ask about rebate programs, electric vehicles. We asked if they were familiar with environmental organizations, community gardens, and becoming greener. Next slide, please. And so, as I said, it wasn't a scientific survey. So as it happens, the people that we happened to survey mostly lived in houses. Some lived in apartments. Some lived in an apartment in a house. Next slide, please. And these people who lived in houses and in other places, they walked a lot. I mean, I was amazed actually when I looked at the first column where it says, they walked almost daily. I thought that was pretty impressive. But in the next slide, you can see that these people in the houses, they didn't all have cars. And I was really surprised at that. I just kind of associated people who own their houses with owning a car as well. So that was very interesting for me. Next slide, please. And because they lived in houses, a lot of these people, obviously they had a little lawn or backyard or something. Now, the thing is that at the launch, people were saying, we don't have enough green space. There's too much distance between one green space and another. So again, we want to take that into account. Next slide, please. A lot of people are considered purchasing green energy, and some people are ready to do it, and other people feel that they need more information. Next slide, please. But they were interested in local green initiatives. So this for me was extremely encouraging, because it means that as we carry on with our discussions in Oakwood and Vaughan around green initiatives, people want to know and they want to do more. Next slide, please. So they talk to their neighbors, and I'm thinking, okay, if you're talking to your neighbors, talk to us, and let's have some more discussion together. Next slide, please. So here are just 2 of the many questions to which we received answers where people wrote comprehensively. Now, Arthur Grahn, who designed the survey, he received pages and pages and pages of people's comments, and I've only included a few. So in terms of green barriers, next slide, please. They said, okay, waste clearly is a huge issue. And another issue, and it was named, is gentrification. And as well as the monster homes that are going up, the carbon footprint of the monster homes that are going up are pretty heavy. Next slide, please. Other barriers were the cost of installing solar panels, And again, the systemic issues, the issues around which it looks like we can't have a very much influence, like gentrification once again. But then again, you know, when you look at the Affordable Housing Working Group, maybe we can have an influence here. Next slide, please.
6-minute mark.
Thank you. And in terms of becoming greener, people did say they thought that green roofs could be helpful. And if you look at the next slide, they divided green roofs into 2 categories, as you can see. Next slide, please.
Just trying to finish reading this.
No reading, passing on. So from the 33 surveys, this is what we learned. People care about greening OV. There are systemic barriers to making OV greener. There are some ways that we can continue the process. So when we look at the next slide is forward looking. Today we're checking in, as Sue was saying, we're going to be drafting a community plan. We'd like working groups like this to continue, and we need to hear from people so that it's representative. Next slide, please. So if you want to work with us, you can email this address, or my personal address is going to go into the chat, and I would be really happy if people would email me as well, because we want to continue this discussion. So do we have a minute for any discussion, Sue?
Yeah, we absolutely do. Yep, go for it.
Okay, so what I want to know is, does this resonate with you? When you listen to this information, do you say to yourselves, I want to see a greener OV? Just put your hand up, you know, and say, yeah, definitely. Thank you. And I'm curious to know, what are you thinking we need to do in order to move forward? And you can unmute yourself and just, you know, talk. What do you think we need to do? For example, do you think that as a community, we can pressure the City of Toronto to move forward more quickly in terms of reducing our carbon footprint? Again, you know, show of hands. Do you think that we need to pressure the local government? I see head nods and hands raised. Okay. And
in the chat, Rebecca says plant more trees. Melissa says trees, parks, and green space. Janet says yes, stronger measures from government.
That's very helpful. Thank you very much. And thankfully we're recording, so all of this information will be part of future discussions. And
Someone asked if we're working with businesses as well as residents.
So far, when I've asked about the Business Improvement Association and their participation in this particular process, apparently they have not had a lot of interaction with us. But in terms of green spaces, I think that they should, because we can make Oakwood, for example, and Vaughan as well, a lot greener and a lot more attractive than it could be. Antigone, yes?
Hi, sorry. I asked if you had demographic information for the respondents for this survey.
Arthur, can you answer that?
We don't have demographic information per se. The only thing that came closest to answering that question was what type of dwelling do you live in? The survey was already very long and we wanted to make it inclusive. So we decided not to sort of focus on demographic questions.
Okay.
Thanks for the question and thanks for the answer. Yes.
Oh, I just wanted to note the reason I asked is because it's likely that perspectives differ across various demographic groups and socioeconomic economic status. And to your point about not just the type of dwelling, but the status of the people living in those dwellings, whether or not they're renters or homeowners, that sort of thing. And it would be interesting to know what kinds of perspectives correlate with that, but completely understandable, you know, wanting to be laser focused on the qualitative data in particular. But I just wanted to note that and ask, of course.
I'm really glad that you did note that, Antigone, and that was something that really struck me when we first started getting the results. But this is only the beginning of the process. So as we're continuing to gather information and as we begin to write this aspect of the plan, this is something that we need to explore further. Thank you so much. Sue, cut us off when you need to.
Yep, that's our 10 minutes exactly. So we're at 2:34. Is there anything as a last burning question? Any participant with anything else to say? Okay, there is a hand up. I think
That
that
was a
person
normal hand.
already asked. Okay, great. Thank you so much, Viva and Morgan, who's not here. Appreciate that. Okay, and thanks everybody for your comments. Great participation. We are now going to go and Linda is going to talk with us about mobility. Let me just bring that up for you, Linda. When we talk about mobility, we talk about moving in and around Oakwood and Vaughan. Share this. Oh. There we go.
Thank you. So I'm Linda. Almuth was involved at the beginning, and she did contribute to some data gathering. She's no longer able to be involved. Next slide. Next slide. Almuth and I met at the launch of Futures OV, and she gave her feedback, and a number of people came to where we were and gave us information about problems they were seeing in the area, issues that they wanted addressed. They put them on the map and they told us verbally. From that, two people said they would join the working group, and they stayed involved as long enough to have one Zoom call and give input to the following questions. So how do you get around? And are you getting around by foot, car, TTC, bike? And where do you go most often? And how do you get there? What do you envision the neighborhood looking like as an easier place to move around in 10 years? And then how does this overlap with cultural and mobility connections, health and safety, economic issues, and green? And we can see that it overlapped quite a bit with the green working group, as a lot of people mentioned that they wanted to have more trees. So if you are walking, you get some shade on the street. Next slide, please. Next slide. So the major findings so far are safer bike routes needed, particularly for Vaughan Road. There's a lot of potholes and cracked streets. The lane disappears, and it's only on one side. People mention that the bus times aren't as regular as they should be, and that at least a couple of more bus stops are needed on Vaughan Road. I'd like to see more on Oakwood too, but again, the concerns were mostly for Vaughan Road. And everyone talked about sidewalk improvements for people who need mobility aids and pushing strollers, walking dogs. It'd be nice to have a slope at the curb for most people, maybe wider sidewalks and enhanced. Next slide. And that's a Vaughan Road bus. We created a survey that is on the website, on Instagram, and we've had 9 responses. And I'm saying that specifically to those of you who are listening, because we need many more responses to really get a true reflection of what this large community wants and is concerned about. So we really hope that you're going to fill it out. It doesn't take long. It's like 6 minutes, a lot less time than being here today, which is much appreciated. And we're going to go to local organizations when this is done, also with the surveys. We'll collect and summarize them. And with the way things are going, it looks like bike lanes and transit service will be highlighted. Next slide, please. So we're doing a poll now. And we want to know which finding you're most interested in. So that's coming up.
Yep, so Kieran is putting the link to the poll in your chat, everybody. If you could click on that link and you'll go over to Slido, the findings that were just talked about. That's what's going to be summarized in the poll. And I'm going to stop sharing and move over to sharing the poll once we've had a few folks complete it. Looks like we've got five people have completed poll. Oh, we're up to 6. Exciting. 7. And if anybody's having issues with getting to the poll, please send a chat to Kieran. You can specify that in your chat box. We're up to 8. We will be including these results from all the polls from both the December 8th session and the December 12th session in our summary as part of forming the LB community plan. We're up to 9 participants. And I will share the results with everyone. There we go. So which finding are you most interested in is the poll request. It looks like the one with the most votes has gotten number 1, the safer bike routes at 56%, with a tie happening for second place here. 22% are talking about increased TTC service and then the sidewalk improvements. Thank you all.
Had a comment in the Q&A saying that the Vaughan Road bus needs to continue past Oakwood.
Okay. That would be great. That would be great. Good. Thank you, everybody, for your responses there. Yep. I'm going to bring it back to your survey, Linda. One moment.
Yeah. Thank you.
So 7-minute mark.
This is the QR code that you can scan to get you directly to the survey. I'd very much appreciate it if you found a little time to fill it in. It covers a few other questions like signage and lighting. So there's some health and safety in there. I also forgot to point out there was a picture of bike rings on Oakwood. It showed 2 of them. There are 3 actually, and they are outside of the Oakwood Library. But those are the only 3 on the whole strip from Rogers Road south to St. Clair. I also had a picture in there of a bench. That was by the Oakwood Library too. And that was the only bench on that strip. Does anyone have any questions?
We put the link to the survey in the chat as well, in case people aren't using QR codes.
Yeah, it's in the chat. If people scroll up a little bit, and I'll put it again in. And people are talking in the chat about how a lot of folks who are mobile right now in like 10 years won't be as mobile as folks age.
Yeah, very good point.
Yep.
Okay.
Any other comments, questions for Linda? Michelle?
That last point, can you hear me?
Yes.
That last point integrates well with our work around seniors because we want to do stuff that helps seniors stay in the community. And one of the things they would certainly want to be able to do is move around in the community, whether they're able to walk or whether they use wheelchairs or scooters. So there is a link between mobility for that population in particular.
Thank you, Peter.
Also on the question slide, there's a few prompts that people might be interested in.
Yeah. Thanks, Karen.
Thank you. Any responses? We're very keen to hear from you.
Okay, so we're
I
gonna keep
have
moving
one- I'm just
Yep.
going to ask one more question.
very, very quick before we go to
Yes,
health and safety.
Do you find that the findings that we have found so far, do you feel that they sit with you the same way?
Also, we do have a comment in the chat saying, wondering about other kinds of barriers to mobility like snow and ice clearing, which I believe is actually one of the questions in the
Survey.
survey. So
Yeah.
we're also wondering about that for folks.
Okay, well, thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Linda, and BBC on this. Okay, we are going to go right to Leah. Leah is going to be talking about first enhanced health and safety, and then youth, spaces, supports, and services for youth. So let me tee yours up here, Leah.
Right.
There you go.
Okay, so we'll be talking about enhanced health and safety, and yeah, next slide. One more. Okay, so our main focus for the Enhanced Health and Safety Working Group, we have our network, the Health and Safety Network, which is an initiative by the OVNAP, and Social Planning kindly gave us a grant of $1,000 to kind of help us start it. So we're going to say the Health and Safety Network is basically the Health and Safety Working Group. So for the network, our main focus was to get data, just to hear from the neighborhood on people's perceptions and experiences, thoughts, or whatever regarding health and safety. So our survey, this is our poster that you see right now. We put it around the neighborhood, sent it through email, just tried to get it around. And originally we did have a survey, but it's kind of changed along the way. Our new network member, Antigone, has a lot of experience with qualitative studies. So she helped to change the survey so that we can hear from folks. So part of our survey, we're trying to reach people who don't speak English fluently. So there's a part of our survey that says, do you know anyone that doesn't speak English fluently? Can you can you help them fill out the survey? The next question is just understanding what people's relation to Oakwood Vaughan. So do you live in Oakwood Vaughan? Do you play in Oakwood Vaughan? Do you just visit? So just trying to understand what people's relationship to Oakwood Vaughan is. And then demographics, so about you. We asked for demographics because we're trying to use the intersectionality framework, understanding how people's experiences with health and safety is tied to people's different identities and how that kind of overlaps or intersects. And then just the questions of, do you feel safe or unsafe in Oakwood Vaughan? Why and how can we improve that? Next slide. So with our data collection outreach, we're doing both online and in person. So there's one little map that shows some of the businesses we've reached. We've also reached out to the library. Councillor Jill and Councillor Josh were kind enough to share it in their newsletter. We shared it with FY to reach youth specifically. Some people or accounts on Instagram have helped. So just different ways to try to get the word out about the survey. Next slide. So far we have 21 survey responses, and that includes the old survey. And because of the old survey and the new survey a little different, there are some gaps there, but yeah, and some data through conversation is there are high rates of overdose and suicide among youth, and many youth lives have been lost because of gun violence. Many folks like the diversity in our neighborhood. It's what makes folks feel safe. And cars, busy intersections, and that our community center, we need a community center, which is already well known. It's already known that we need a community center at Fairbank would be, or sorry, not Fairbank, former Vaughan Road Academy would be nice. Next slide. So these are just some of the like data results. So for age, mostly youth have responded, which is great because we don't hear from youth enough, but we've got a good, I would say, a good mix of folks. Only one folk have over 70 have responded, but I think I would like to say we've got a good mix. Next slide. And these are like, what do people do in the Oakwood Vaughan area? People had a choice to select more than one option, but most folks shop and eat at businesses in the area. And then the next one would be people play and, you know, use parks and stuff like that. So, and a lot of folks hang out with family, friends, or colleagues in the neighborhood. Yeah, next slide. This is the results for gender identity. Out of the 18 responses from the new survey, 50% of folks were identified as a man or boy. One folk identified as non-binary, and the rest identified as a woman or a girl. Next slide. And this is people's identities, racial identities. For this one, you were able to select more than one. And so we did get a lot of mixed folks. I would say, I believe out of the six folks that identified as white, four folks actually identified as just white, while the other two identified as mixed, just to like get an idea. So we did get a lot of mixed folks, which is great. Next slide. So these are our findings. On our survey, we asked 3 responses. The first question was, what makes you feel safe? So that was one of our findings was, what makes people feel safe is just being familiar with the neighborhood, growing up in the neighborhood. The people in the neighborhood is why people feel safe, which makes total sense. Our second finding, which is related to our second question of what makes you feel unsafe. So why people feel unsafe is the visible substance use, homelessness, folks with visible signs of mental illnesses, violence, and like the different kinds of violence, and certain parts of areas, especially at nighttime. And the third question of how can we help you feel safe in the neighborhood? And people have said like more lighting in areas would help. Addressing the violence that happens in the neighborhood and the harassment and assault against women, and community centers, which we already know. Once again, community centers would definitely help. And of course, like health and safety is very much related. So when we talk about safety, their conversations around health definitely come up since they're very much connected.
That's your 6. Thank you.
Oh, okay. So this is just like a sneak peek of, I screenshotted what people have said. So the first question is, why do people feel safe? Like mentioned, it's the people. Second question, what makes you feel unsafe? The violence in the area. And the third question is, what can we do to kind of help improve that? And so this is just a little snapshot of what people have said. Yeah, so our focus is qualitative data. We're still trying to get more data because 21 people is not enough. 100 people probably won't be enough, but we're due, obviously, just keep trying. Councillor Jill Andrews has said that they're going to prioritize reaching folks that do not speak English fluently. So we're hoping that in the future we can actually help like target those folks and hear more from them. And we also want to make sure that our demographics we are trying to have a representative sample. Oh, MPP, Jill Andrew, sorry.
Yep. Member of Provincial Parliament, yeah.
Yes. So yes, thank you, Biba. But we'll be keeping an eye on the demographics of the survey just to make sure we hear from everyone. And this is our survey. You can also, I'm gonna put if you can't scan.
It's already there for you. It's already there, Leah. Yep. Let's see if people have comments from your presentation.
Yeah. general comments or questions? Otherwise, I might ask some questions as well.
6 of them, I think.
Great, let's hear some.
Okay, maybe that's all, Kieran.
Okay, so then I will pose a question instead then. So out of the, I actually do want to hear from people, I guess, who haven't filled out the survey. Like, what is your experience or perceptions, or what are your stories of health and safety? I'd like to hear from you. Even if you did fill out the survey, it'd be great to hear from you what your experiences are. What makes you feel safe? And you can put it in the chat as well. What makes you feel safe in the neighborhood? Why do you, is there any area you perhaps avoid for any reason? What makes you feel unsafe? Or what can we do to improve health and safety in the neighborhood?
You can just unmute yourself if you would like to speak. Yeah.
Okay, I'm muted. I just put in the chat the link to the position paper that OVCO wrote on community safety. And we link community safety to the social determinants of health. So wherever we're looking at, what are the root causes of violence in particular, we always are looking at how people are living, what their situations are, if they're marginalized, if they're experiencing racism, if they're poor, and so on and so forth. But I see that somebody else wants to speak, so I will stop.
In the chat, it was asked, what's the best way to ask for a street light to be installed at a specific location?
I don't know the exact answer to that, but I heard, I did hear from someone that they wanted to get lights at like on the property of the schools. So in that specific situation, you would have to reach out to TDSB. I think it depends on where the street light would be on. And then from that, you would go to whatever specific organization or government or levels of government that are in charge of that. But I am not the most knowledgeable on that.
You can also tell us and we'll include it maybe in the community plan. We did have those comments previously. We were also, Janet did a comment of saying that they feel safe in the neighborhood, but rarely go out after dark. And then a couple of suggestions are in the chat for the streetlight question.
Awesome, thank you.
I just say around the streetlight question, that's a good question. People usually go to their counselor to ask that question. But one thing, if we get a community plan out there that talks about street lighting and talks about what people want, and it's supported by more than one person, it's more likely that the community be listened to. In fact, there's a lot of people behind an OV community plan that actually identifies lighting as a major issue, needs improvement.
Thanks so very much, Leah. And thank you everybody for your comments and chat as well. I'm going to be moving us right now over to spaces, supports and services for youth. And thank you, Leah, in advance. I know that you're doing double duty here for that one. And there you go.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so for the youth, we have also, like the working group, we have the Vaughan Oakwood Youth Network, which is will count as the same thing as a working group. So for this presentation, we'll just be talking about the network because it basically is the same thing. Okay, so with the Vaughan Oakwood Youth Network, we started this in September this year. We are a youth-led network where it's just basically you can access jobs, volunteers, we meet up to plan events, programs, whatever it is we want. It's a network where youth can voice their opinions. And oh yes, speaking of the logo, I should mention the logo is also designed by a youth, which is amazing. But yeah, so, and it is for youth that we haven't specified any borders of like identifying as a VO youth. We kind of let youth identify themselves. Any kind of connection you have to the neighborhood, you are a VO youth. So we don't have any like specific, you know, lists of like, okay, if you do this, if you do that, if you are this, then, but yeah. Next slide. This is our mission, vision, values. So our vision, I should say first, is that we want to make sure that every VO youth or anyone that visits VO youth or uses services in the neighborhood feels safe and supported and has a sense of belonging. And we're going to do that by, because it's a youth-led network, we kind of do our own planning and our own decisions on what we think we need, and we are on the front lines doing that. And our values, those are our values. Respect, just, you know, respecting people's backgrounds, whatever it is, respecting people's boundaries, respecting people's mental health or needs, whatever it is. Equity, of course, and there's a little like picture that kind of, I like that picture that kind of basically explains what equity is compared to equality. Sustainability, we are looking at long-term impacts, always looking at long-term impacts. We want this to kind of, you know, obviously be a thing in the long term. Self-reflection, critical thinking, always looking at ourselves, always looking at our network and kind of reevaluating and always knowing, just self-reflection, knowing what our relationship is to our work, being critical of ourselves and our work so that we're always improving. And knowledge and power of lived experiences. You don't have to have any kind of professional background. You don't need to have any like undergrad, master's, whatever. If you've been through it, we value your experience. If you are going through that, we value it and we will take it. These mission, vision, values have not been confirmed. We still have to confirm it through the planning team, but yeah, anyway, next slide. What are we up to? We're meeting virtually every week. Hopefully it can be up to like bi-weekly or monthly, but at the moment we have to meet virtually once a week because there's a lot of work. We're hosting our first ever holiday drive. We have gotten donations and we're using F4 Youth Initiative space. Our event is happening December 17. We're having the holiday drive at the same time that FY is having their party. But yeah, next slide. This is kind of our little like a mapping. It's a good visual representation, visual of like what our structure, I guess, or foundation or organizational structure is. And so we have like youth voices, social media, like the OFCO plan, events, partnerships, outreach, mentorship. But yeah, this is like a visual map of who we are and our kind of branches of the network. Next slide. At the moment, we are trying to hear from youth. Our first initial community meeting, we've heard from youth, and our meetings, our weekly meetings for the planning meetings, we've heard from youth. We have 12 people on our planning team Google group. We use a Google group. 23 folks have signed up through the form, and we have at the moment 204 Instagram followers, which is great. Next slide. So what are we hearing from youth? We need a community center. I keep saying that, but it's quite obvious we need a community center. It's going to meet a lot of youth's needs, but not even just youth, just everyone in general. VO youth want more mentorship opportunities and ways to connect with each other because, you know, sometimes youth don't know what they want or what to do. They need, you know, a mentor. But here's some, like, I just copied and pasted 2 comments saying that for the networks, this person said they're very happy that's what's happened, because if they had the network or something like this when they were younger, they wouldn't have lived the life they did. And then the second comment was, I wish that FYI, they're talking about FYI, was there when they were a youth. Youth means youth for the term that if people don't know, but people are saying that basically if FY, we need the support. Yeah, next slide. This is kind of a visual map of what is in the area. If people can see, there are quite a few schools actually in the area. The only community center that is available right now is the Oakwood Library and FY just recently. But to be honest, not a lot. Not a lot. Next slide. What are we doing at the
That's your
moment?
6 minutes.
Oh, thanks. Okay, so at the moment we need to develop our foundation. So a lot of meetings and just kind of getting the word out so people know that we exist. And so, yeah, social media campaigns. We have a holiday raffles that's trying to encourage people to fill out the surveys related to Off-Code Fine as well. Yeah, so at the moment we just need to figure out our foundations before we do anything. Next slide. Yeah, and this is kind of what we are reaching out, like, you know, anyone that lives in the area, plays in the area, whatever. And our age group category is 12 to 29. Yeah, next slide. We are trying to reach as many equity seeking groups as much as possible. And that includes BIPOC folks, that includes people with disabilities, newcomer folks. That does mean that we have to look within ourselves on how we can actually create that space for people to be comfortable. But we are trying to make sure that we have a good representation on our board, the people that participate, the people we hear from. Yeah, next slide.
And that's your 7 minutes. Yeah.
Awesome. And then, yeah, that's analysis later on. Questions, comments, anything?
Well, I think you have a poll.
Oh, yes. Yes. So I'm assuming, I don't know if there are youth in the call. If you are a youth, great. If you are not a youth, but if you have a child that is 12 to 29, where do you or your youth hang out and spend time in the VO? Any business they go to, community centers, where do they hang out? If you are not a youth, but have a youth in your household or a child.
And I believe the link is in the chat. So folks could go and select the link. Please go over to Slido and then complete it. I'm gonna stop sharing for a moment, and then we'll bring up the poll and just see how that's going.
I don't have any responses so far.
We have 0 responses. Oh.
Let me double check the link.
Does anyone have any children that are between 12 to 29? Okay, that's fine. So let me ask again then, if no one is a youth or has children that are between 12 to 29, I'm sure you've seen youth in the neighborhood, you pass by them, you've interacted with them. From what you know, or from what you've seen, I just want to hear, I'm gonna ask a general open question. What is your thoughts on what you've seen regarding youth, what you think youth need, what is just, I'm gonna have it as an open conversation. I just want to hear people's thoughts.
And feel free to unmute yourself. Barbara.
There's a youth hub at the Maria Shuka Library, and I certainly see a lot of youth there. And I just ask you what connection, if any, you've made with the youth worker at that library. I think they might be a really good resource for you.
That's actually a really good point. I've thought about Maria Shuker. I didn't know they actually had a youth worker, but I definitely will reach out. I think I tried to find their contact information, but I wasn't sure who to reach out specifically, but I'll probably have to look more into, or just reach out to the general email. But yes, that is a very good point. I didn't know they had a youth worker, so I'm going to be finding who that is.
Janet, do you want to go?
Sure. Yeah, I'm a senior, so my kids don't live here, and anyway, I don't have a kid perspective, but I just wanted to say that if and when we get our wish for a community center, I envision seniors interacting with youth, and we can both benefit enrich each other's lives, I'm sure, in many, many ways. And I look forward to that day.
Yes, I definitely agree with that. I think both can learn from each other very much. And
Mm.
I would very much be looking forward to that. So yeah,
And I really applaud the work that you've done. It's fantastic.
it's not just me. It's honestly the network. I can't do it without them.
You can,
And Rebecca.
you can
Rebecca has
translate-
been an amazing help, and I cannot do it without her.
well, you can take that message back to everyone that you're working with. It's really good.
Peter, do you want to speak next?
Just want to say, to reinforce your point about the community center, at least in the summer, spring and fall, there's a lot of young people out behind VRA playing basketball and playing in the playgrounds there. So it's a popular and known local spot for young people.
Yeah. Bruce also said the Phil White outdoor rink is well used in the winter and can be used as a skateboard facility in the summer if it was left open. Rebecca, you had your hand up. Do you want to?
Oh yeah, no, I was just gonna say that my son and his friends, a lot of times they hang out at like Joseph J. Peachy. Sorry, that's my nephew in the background. But yeah, so they hang out at Joseph J. Piccinini. Of course, that's not in our area, but I think that just also highlights the need for more spaces for kids to play, like do physical activity. I know they like recently got rid of the soccer field at Rawlinson, and there's no soccer field at Vaughan Road either. So anyways, that just kind of highlights that that need as well. But I guess there's also another question, not necessarily directly to youth. So, but my mom here was asking around what is the biggest barrier to Vaughan Road becoming a community? Like, because it's so obvious that that's what we need. What's, I guess, the biggest barrier for that to happen?
Peter, I'm going to ask you to answer that in very, very quick, short order, because we need to get to mapping. We're a little bit over. Great question. Peter, can you give it a 30-second answer?
Well, the biggest barrier is the lack of flexibility of the Toronto board and the people who control that property to give the community access. So we
Peter, you froze.
really need strong community support for.
Yeah, barrier TDSB, and we need strong community support. Thank you, Peter. Okay, folks, I'm going to take us over. Kieran has done quite a bit of work to bring information across the various working groups. Thank you so much, Leah and Rebecca, for your work on enhanced health and safety as well as youth. Let's get into our mapping and what we call the intersections of this information. Kieran, you go for it.
Also, just highlighting to my work members, there's a question in the chat if someone's able to respond to that. Yeah, so hi everyone. This final presentation today is on the mapping and intersections of the neighborhood and the different working groups. So we started with individual maps that were created for each working group, as you can see on the slide. These maps have all kinds of information, including existing stores and services, but also things that people want and things that people want improved. And these maps were a great way to start seeing where things started to overlap. So we have the OV Future Search built around these different topics in this infographic. And during the presentations, you might have heard like consistent themes that came up, you know, such as a community center and parks, or even like traffic safety. And these topics don't exist individually, but all correspond. And this is a really important part to the community plan. So on the next slide, we started looking at these intersections by the highlights that came up consistently in the different working groups. So you can see listed here, community spaces, parks, community centers, schools, current affordable housing, and Vaughan Road Academy were all consistently brought up. So as an example of these intersections, the parks that the community does have are highly used and appreciated by community members, and they were mentioned in work relating to the environmental working group, the mobility working group, and the children's working group, just to name a couple. The affordable housing is also a key point to letting community members stay in the neighborhood and even letting businesses stay in the neighborhood. The yellow, or not the yellow, the orange spots, sorry, but the affordable housing spots show not all affordable housing in the neighborhood, but a few examples of it, such as the TCHC buildings on Eglinton and an example of a duplex apartment. So a lot of these dots, the purple ones, are community spaces, but most of these are actually religious spaces that their congregation is able to use for services such as like senior services or food banks or other items that are really helpful to the community, but not necessarily available to everyone. So it was really emphasized that we need community spaces that are available to everyone, and also just not relying on these religious centers as much as we currently are. And Vaughan Road Academy was consistently highlighted just because of all the dreams that everyone has around it, but not that it's currently being used for a lot, but as we've already talked about. So we moved on to community needs that were brought up consistently. And these included increased affordable housing, increased green space, particularly in the northwest area of the neighborhood, increased traffic safety, more community spaces and centers, more health services. So while parts that I have already used an example as in highlights were super important for all community members, it was also really emphasized that not everyone has access to them. And for a lot of people, it's like a 15-minute walk, even to just like a park entrance. And mobility mentioned before, there's not a lot of benches. So especially if you have accessibility problems, that can be really difficult to have any access to green space in this neighborhood. And so to move on, also the community center, or still on that slide, but to move on to the next point is, so community spaces, community centers we have one in the neighborhood, and the libraries are also really used, but the services and recreational activities that they can provide were often requested throughout our working groups. And we've already heard this, that Vaughan Road Academy could act as one of the points for that. And then finally on this slide, the developments mainly along Eglinton, you can see the dark brown areas. These are proposals for condo developments, and they have the potential to make the affordable housing issue much worse in the neighborhood if the community doesn't advocate to ensure a large majority of affordable housing to actually help current community members. So our next slide and final one, you'll see a lot of the points that I've brought up previously, and I wanted to highlight these as overarching needs that will be throughout the OB community plan. And these included services, revitalization, and affordability. In OB, there's a general lack of services for all community members in the neighborhood, including like health, recreation. There's no pediatric services like anywhere in OB from what I've seen. And then for revitalization, it's very important, green spaces have been mentioned. There's also vacant storefronts, which have been mentioned on Wednesday during our economic presentation. So especially along Eglinton, it's really important to revitalize the community from 10 years of construction that's been happening. But it's important also to note that revitalization and gentrification can often go together, and revitalization has to be aimed at helping current community members instead of generally just making it a desirable place to live for new people to move into. And that actually connects to the final point here, affordability. Housing prices and rental prices have been increasing in the neighborhood and across the city. The community needs actual housing that they can afford, and also businesses need storefront rentals that they can afford. Especially if we want current restaurants and like different highlights that a lot of people mentioned to remain in the neighborhood. These things are all crucial if we want the OB we know and love to remain, and also for people who need them to have services provided. So that concludes the presentation. Sorry if it was a little speedy. The next slide has a few prompts for any questions that folks might have. I'll also look in the chat in case people are putting it there. Yeah, so I guess if anyone has any other like community highlights or things they really like about OV, or even just general things that you wish were here, like if you wish there was a grocery store closer. I know I'm always going to No Frills on the streetcar.
Any other comments or questions for Kieran? And team members, I can't see the chat, so let's have a look. Then thank you, Kieran. Thanks so much. It's really important that we're bringing the data together because that's what we're going to be doing as we create the OB community plan. Thank you.
There was one question somebody asked about how much the Fairbank Community Center is used.
Okay, thanks, Bill.
I don't know much about that particular center.
Anybody else on the call know about use at Fairbank?
No, seniors use, there's programs for seniors at Fairbanks.
And Park Forestry and Recreation as well. They conduct a lot of programs there.
Yeah, Janet in the chat says that they think it is encouraging overall. I had a really fun time going through everyone's work and seeing what we do and don't have in the community. So hopefully at some point those maps will be a community resource that we can all use.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kieran. There's a lot of work there. And thanks for your comments, folks. Okay, so we are moving to close up. We've got a few closing comments that Peter and I will be making as we talk about moving forward. And so I'm actually going to start us here. I was making a few notes as we were moving along on some of the things that we heard you talk about today. So I've put a few of those on here. Apologies for the typos. Other comments, this is just an open call for those that are still with us here. Either speak up, come off of mute, or put into the chat. What things would you like us to take note of coming out of this session as we move to start writing the OV community plan based on the updates that you've been hearing today, as well as the updates from the 8th? Anything else that you'd like noted?
Got a hand raised, Antigone.
Great, go ahead.
To Kieran's point earlier, and to a point that I was making earlier, it's important to think about not just making this community great for people wanting to move in, but for the people who are already here. And that means engaging with everybody who's here, most especially equity seeking groups and marginalized people. And that's part of the reason I connected with Jill Andrew about connecting with non-English speaking and people who have English as a second language, but non-English speaking people in particular, who also deal additionally with issues of precarious immigration and worries around that and worries around tenant rights and the like. And so just making sure that we're hearing from as many people as possible, and the people who are here and not just the people who may make up in the community in the future or will move in, I think is incredibly important. So I wanted to note that as a thread that has run through some of the presentations that we've seen.
Yeah, so very true. And that's exactly why I asked at the beginning if folks know of people that maybe don't even have a computer, right? So there's lots of people in our neighborhood that don't have computers. They also don't have access to the internet. We want to still be able to reach those people, whoever they are. So if you know of somebody, please do let OFCO know. We're also happy to take ourselves somewhere, keeping appropriate distance, and so that we can share information with people. We have some folks that could help with some translation as well. So if you're hearing that and speaking with people in the neighborhood, we encourage that, and we would like to reach as many people as we can. As a volunteer group with a very limited budget, it's difficult to do something like a house by house flyer drop. Really expensive to make photocopies, and it takes about 12 people, 2 hours per person to do drops at a lot of houses here. So if anybody has ideas on how we could be reaching more people in OV, please put it in the chat. Please speak up, because we absolutely want to.
A couple of comments in the chat.
Awesome. Can we read them out?
Yeah, so Janet says that they would like us to see us focus on intervening and preempting developers coming in to build unaffordable units. That was done a little bit previously when we were talking a bit more. I think it was follow up on the condo development that I mentioned. And that's actually something that the Affordable Housing Group, which Bill is a part of, co-leads, is actively working on now and trying to suss out the different developers in the neighborhood and developments occurring. And then Leva says that people may want to know more about the history of our struggle to make the most of the space at the former VRA, since so many raised it during the presentations. And Janet says, is there a flyer we can print off and share, pointing folks to the website perhaps? Erica agrees with that. And yeah, that's the chat.
Absolutely. Yes. So there are flyers that are available, and we can have those just on the website so anybody can download. There are lots of flyers posted as well, so you'll see those in the neighborhood. We did a posting on telephone poles this time, especially along Oakwood and along Vaughan Road. Other ideas, please, those are welcome. Thank you for having those in the chat, so that'll be part of our record of the meeting. And other ideas, keep them coming. So there is a poll that if Kieran, you could put that in the chat. People could also put their ideas in with that poll. How do we make this a truly OV community plan? I'm going to leave that poll open while Peter and I conclude up our presentation this afternoon. Peter.
Right, so we're really happy that people joined us this afternoon and got an idea where about half of our activity is going with the great presentations that were made. All of those groups wouldn't mind more volunteers joining them, which and as well as the 4 or 5 groups that presented on Wednesday evening. I know we're getting more volunteers involved in our seniors working group for sure as we go forward. So we've had some good work since September 27th, and we bring this forward today as a community check-in, a work in progress. Our plan is to get more input from even a more diverse population to be able to prepare our final plan that we hope to be able to bring to the whole community maybe the end of January or February and call you together again. And if you look at that slide, you'll see an email address that goes to Kieran. If you're interested in volunteering or have any ideas for us, please get in touch with Kieran that way, or any of the chairs of the leads in the working group. And we'll make sure we invite you to our 3rd community engagement meeting. We'd like it to be in person. We don't know if it can be, if it's that early since COVID's still raging. But apart from that, why don't you share some of this information with your own network? Let people know, share our website, lead them to OV Futures Search, and maybe some of your friends and neighbors would get in touch with us. We'd really appreciate that. Sue?
Perfect. I'd like to do, and I'm just going to put up the email that Peter was referencing there, OV Community Plan at gmail.com. And I'd like to do a thank you. So there are many of you that have joined us today to hear what's been happening. Thank you for your time and your questions and comments and your ongoing support. We're doing this as a volunteer group, and the more people that can be part of this, then the more chance we have with the OV Community Plan and being able to do things like negotiate with developers, share the information with the city, and have a partnership with the city. So thank you. Because of your participation, we'll be able to do that. Thank you to OFCO, who has patiently helped us organize how this was going to work. As Peter mentioned in our introduction, we had a planning group that has been meeting weekly since April to plan out OV Future Search. So I wanted to thank all the members of that particular planning group. I'm going to apologize if I miss anybody. Let's see here. We've got Peter Clutterbuck. You've heard from Peter. You also heard from Rebecca. She has been part of the team all the way back. We've got Oscar, who's not joining us today, I don't think. We have the 3 students from formerly known as Ryerson, now known as University X, Morgan and Davin, as well as Zach. We've got some of you may have gotten communications from Karina. I'm not sure that Karina is with us today, but she's been helping plan out our communications all the way back to April as well. I did want to recognize Kieran. Kieran has been doing quite a lot of work with us since joining us towards the end of October as project coordinator. So thank you so much, Kieran, because you're enabling this massive effort to keep on going. And to recognize all of our co-leads, and you heard from many of them today. So Leba Spring, for example, Linda Rosengarten previously, Almut as well, and our co-leads that we're speaking also on Wednesday, in addition to Leah and Rebecca that are acting as co-leads. And last but not least, a recognition for a former member of our planning committee, Michelle Sinea, who unfortunately passed away in late June. She was one of the original architects, designers of the OV Featured Search approach, and also a member of our OV community. And we miss her and appreciated her input today.
And Sue, I think it's important for the people to know that you've been leading this process weekly and daily through emails and phone conversations and meetings since April. And it's your drive and spirit and determination that ensures that all this come together. So we really appreciate your leadership in this.
Thank you. Thanks so much. And thanks everyone for joining us. Have a great rest of your Sunday. Take good care, and we'll be posting the video up on OFCO website soon. We can stop the recording now, Kieran. Thank you.
Thanks all.